Pilates. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, my patrons, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor. And that, of course, means within the point of view of MMP as to what Pilates is and what being an instructor is and how to survive as such. And maybe I don't know what I'm talking about because I haven't survived as a Pilates instructor teaching other people. I haven't been teaching personally in a while. So today's two titles and one point of view out of 10,000, right? So number one title is that Pilates comes before gender. Pilates comes before gender. Maybe I should just leave it at that. And then the number two title is that Pilates is personal and universal. Okay, so those are my two titles. And I see on social media someone teaching a class exclusively for one gender. And I think, wow, how brave. But knowing that this broadcast is from me to you about how to survive as a Pilates instructor, from this point of view, Pilates comes before gender. Meaning it doesn't matter what gender you are in the pursuit of doing Pilates. And then the means to which you do it. Now you can point to the core and the pelvis and talk about differences in structure. But all that structure is to facilitate other things or besides just the physics that's involved. And yet it's the physics that involved that comes first that the specifics are adapting to. So I have notes, I wrote notes because it's such an interesting topic and it's such guarded times when speaking about gender differences. Pilates achieves its essence before the distinction of gender. That's another way of saying what I already said. Before the distinction of gender. It's the same for all human beings. How a gender takes on a point of view does not make Pilates that point of view. I do not mean to be offensive. I just point to the obvious gender majority of one gender in Pilates being active, seeking the participation of the other gender. And the current majority of gender participating in Pilates, I think, maybe it won't be a big shock, but I've always thought of it as they'll be in for a big shock because historically already when you look at Pilates being promoted to the gender that's not currently doing it as much as the other, you get this tug of war between what a point of view offers as a tug of war between those doing the viewing versus those seeking to promote a view. One gender's point of view of something versus the other's, and in so saying, and see, as soon as where did I write that? As soon as you make the distinction that there will be different points of view based upon that distinction of gender, then it's nothing but bither bother. So there's bad news and there's good news, and what's important to recognize, I think, to survive, is the continuing unfolding or evolution in the Pilates culture. And the bad news for the old way of things being what they were is that big money continues to rush in to hoover up the profit and the passion for Pilates that people have, are willing to pay for. And in being big money, its objective is profit, and ends up monetizing, ends up presenting Pilates for optimum monetization. And that's why I think some Pilates instructors will teach beyond what big money cares to present Pilates as, because it shades optimum monetization. In the big money and in the millions of people passionate about Pilates, the sheer number of people made the aristocracy completely thin. And in other ways, highly pointed, but the opinion of yours truly, me, is that in the tsunami of Pilates passion we're watching happening, we're trying to survive in, it matters. I mean, just the presumption that you know Pilates and you got your training from somewhere, and now I'm here for you and whatever else, and for whatever that is. See? It's for the person, because contemporary point of view, in my opinion, is that Pilates really doesn't have an essence of its own. And that puts the deliverer of whatever Pilates is with whatever else it's mixed in as the individual, puts the individual front and center. In Michael Miller Pilates, we hold back the curtain. We don't stand in front of it. I mean, we do. But the objective is to hold the curtain back. And so, to protect ourselves from the pressure of all of the Pilates expression that's out there, and to compete against what's out there. If you're making money as a Pilates instructor, and you want to keep making money as such, and not see the value of what you're doing go down and down to insignificance, to where you're just trying to make a blend with Pilates and whatever else to make yourself more valuable. both go together. But from me to you, I'm pointing to, if Pilates has an essence of its own, then it's more that it relieves you of having it to be all about you as the instructor and everything that you've accumulated and everything that you're doing. I mean, that's an egotistical way to look at things, which might be preferable until something gets in the way of that. Like somebody else, like what? Okay, so I talked about big money and aristocratic dilution. And then the willful ignorance that comes from just wanting to cling to whatever you found to be true and precious and sacred about Pilates that matters to you as an individual, and that as a teacher, instructor, you care deeply about. I do. The good news, I think, is that we're headed toward common ground. Now, if you got your own part of the ocean that has your own part of the world in it, as long as it floats and you're having fun, go for it. And the reason I say that we're headed toward common ground is because of the big money. Because the big money, in the pursuit of understanding what makes the money, will come to realize that the closer they are to the essence of what it is, the better their bottom line. Now, maybe not. Maybe by presenting a diluted or a tapered, or just not a point of view that considers the MMP point of view of being, thinking, and observing, and that those three capacities in the human being, I don't know, is the big money really going to codify that kind of training? When really just teaching the choreography, just teaching the syllabus, just presenting all the information without necessarily having to clarify the grammar that it all works within? I don't know. But I think that it's big money that will have an influence on how Pilates is projected and therefore how it's perceived. And to think that, all right, so I find if I just come back to my point of view as what I'm trying to clarify, it keeps me focused to what matters, because it's the point of view that matters to me that I want you to get. And that goes right to contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit, interpreted as being, thinking, and observing. If you were to pick being, thinking, or observing and look at it through a bifurcation of gender, which of those capacities would one gender be deeper in than the other? And the question is, why is one gender predominantly involved in Pilates and seemingly encountering frustration at getting the opposite gender to participate? And so, when you look at the role of a Pilates instructor as coordinating, being, thinking, and observing, all of this comes before and is regardless of gender, because you're dealing with the human body, the human being in physics. You're dealing with biology and physics. Moreover, you're dealing with biology accomplishing something in the physics. So what is that? What does the biology accomplish in the physics? That a Pilates instructor is primarily concerned with would be movement. Because until you see movement, you have nothing to correct, and so you don't stand inside that corrective feedback loop that is your role as a Pilates instructor. Until, of course, they're good enough to dance within their own feedback loop, which is autonomy, the target, right? So, if you look at the side of the gender that primarily is not involved with Pilates now in 2019, I think part of it is because Pilates doesn't understand itself enough yet, and its efforts to maintain its identity through an interpretation of one group's point of view of what it is leaves out the three capacities that Joe points to in his definition of his method, and that being thinking one of them. If you had to pick a gender and say which gender is predominantly thinking, and if you had to pick a gender, would you say which gender is predominantly being? And I would say it that way because to me, this observing capacity in life and specifically in human beings is what it is to the human being regardless of gender. And that, I may be totally wrong on that, but it's my point of view, and that's the one I'm sticking to. So, my end message is be careful what you wish for is my end message, because the popularity of Pilates, the whole wave of it, the whole surge of it, is definitely bringing more balance to the gender involvement. And as such, more thinking, if you go along with what I've been generalizing in. And so, if you love the way Pilates is or was, or the fabric of it and the sorority of it, the sisterhood, it will always be that. But Pilates, in the MMP point of view as being an ideal, will always be beyond a group's interpretation of it based on the group that they belong to. Why is that? Well, to me, that's because Pilates is about the human being's reaction to being alive. It's is so totally human in nature because it is anticipatory in its context. It's conditioning. It's doing something now, not for what's wrong now, but to be ready for what comes up. It's conditioning. It's training. And it's a routine. And the quality of the routine and the depth of the performance and the being completely concentrated on the purpose of the exercise. What is that out there in the world, in the Pilates culture? What's the purpose of the exercises? Because I don't know anymore, because I got lost within trying to clarify the MMP point of view as an ideal view. And it gets its ideal view straight out of Joe's book. And maybe I'm wrong, and see, I say it right now. There is a very subjective interpretation of Pilates without as much recognition for its character in and of itself. That's my opinion. And the character in and of itself is the choreography of the mat. The mat is the method. And in that mat you see progressive patterns of movement. Flexion, extension, side bend, rotation, and torsion. So when you're instructing and you're doing something in flexion, well, you can stay in flexion, or you can move to extension, or you can skip that and go to side bending or twisting, or the choice is up to you, but the pattern is already there. So, the way to get someone involved is to get their capacities involved. And for any human being who thinks a lot, who has a lot of thinking going on, to the extent that you can involve their thinking, it helps you coordinate their being and observing with that. Some people you just have to explain things to, or some people just need an explanation. They want to know why. And why would that be? Maybe because they want more control. And so, I think that as money seeks to make more money, it will seek more reasoned insight into what is making the money. And align itself with a human being's capacity in being, thinking, and observing. You have to do a little research to see the physics that's currently going on. Would I love to talk to Joe and try to give him my take on how his message connects you to the universe faster than light. Where does he say in his writings that this attention paying, or this, is it attention paying? This concentrating is so important that it's more important than anything else. And indeed, MMP points to observing and saying observing has to be part of this. And then it's up to the being and the thinking to participate in its capacities. You have to give thinking enough to chew on, actually to pursue the performance more ideally. There you go, there you go. You're lost a little bit there. The thinking part of Pilates and being concentrated on the purpose of the exercise. What is the purpose of the exercise? And in MMP, it's uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. That's the MMP definition of Pilates. Best I can do. Maybe you have a better one. When you seek to define it, what it is, for what it is, you transcend the point of view of tradition and contemporary and word of mouth and all of that. In the transcension, it doesn't mean that all of what exists within the hierarchy of humanity and its interest in Pilates won't continue on. It's just that all of it, I think, will slide over onto the foundation of it being what it is of itself, it having an identity of its own, to where you're pulling the curtain back and introducing someone to that message, that experience. So, maybe it's because of the passion on Pilates that holds itself together like hemoglobin, and denies rationality for the sake of sanctity. Thinking is going to change the overall energy of the Pilates culture. I don't see how that can't be the case. But the hemoglobin, it's like no one cares to move beyond looking at Pilates as a heritage that puts you in the center of things, me in the center of things. And maybe that will always be the case, but the message from MMP is that gender doesn't enter into it. It's the physics that the human body is working with that allows it to move through space. What don't you get? What don't you get? See, and to protect Joe's message, see, when does it cease being about you and whatever you've made of it to whatever of it that has an identity of its own worth illuminating apart from whatever else you've made of it? So yeah, collect all the original work you can. And be wary of people that only show you clips to promote their studio, because that's living from I'm superior to you because of clips I have in the attic. And there's not enough clips. Well, see, no clips from the attic are needed because there's enough clips out in the public to assemble the pieces and see the picture that the assembled pieces reveal. That's my puzzle thing. I don't know, someday it's like I want to, what don't you get? What don't you get about core new tension? You know, why doesn't this rock your world? It rocks mine. See, the irony is in trying to make distinction, trying to in some way make illumination or gain gain involvement, participation from a group that seems as opposed to another group. So looking at two different groups, say two different genders or the extremes within those genders, seeing which part of being, thinking, and observing has a following and which doesn't, and how those that you have to show me the ball. See? Here, like right here, yeah. Nice size one. You have to show me the ball. There has to be something to get. And ideally, it's sensationally, but in performing Pilates exercises, concentrating on their purpose as you do them, how do you know that other than in knowing, namely thinking, right? And it's in your thinking that lets you pursue the quality of your effort. And MMP thinks Pilates is an ideal. And so the effort that you make in performing the mat work is ideal in nature. See, ideal in nature, that's such a sweet phrase. Because in nature means nature, the world around us, what's real in nature. And yet within nature there are ideals, and Joe's choreography reflects those ideals, both in terms of progressions, in terms of loading, getting heavier, and in terms of pattern, getting more complex. All right, maybe that is headed to a good conclusion. No, that's... So this, I think, works. Would you agree with me that it's human nature to want to preserve and maintain whatever is seen as an advantage? Even to the point of promoting that the way they see it is the way it is to be seen. There's the rub. No matter the gender, it's the capacities of being, thinking, and observing that the Pilates instructor conjures into an effort to coordinate. So as I said earlier, money will make sense of Pilates. Now I don't see any money in my life currently, but Michael Miller Pilates makes sense. And then in thinking about this, as you've heard me describe, the presence of big money will want to monetize further, and to do that they'll want to understand it better. And in the understanding, that understanding will come from the realm of human initiative where money happens, which is thinking. And in applying thinking toward Pilates and looking for rationale to base product on to maximize profits, it'll at least head in that direction, but maybe can't go there all the way because you can't market to the public being, thinking, and observing. And maybe that's just a misconception of mine, but it's as though the presumption in human beings, I think, is that it's our thinking that is who we are, and it comes across as threatening if we feel some kind of pressure to be something other than what we're capable of thinking about, even though the observer is right there tapping its foot, observing everything, right? So, there will always be sisterhood and brotherhood around any subject. And that's just making a gender statement that one gender versus the other gender. And who does that anymore anyway? It's not about gender. It's about being in your body. It's about thinking. And it's about observing. So that's why it's bad news in a way, because Pilates used to be something, I think, that was held in high esteem, practiced at a high level of art, and completely dissolved in the pursuit of passion right around the world into the mother of 10,000 things. So you can enjoy and go on and continue to treat Pilates or whatever it is, however you treat it or think of it and use it or make of it. But the group that you wish would come in and do more of Pilates from your point of view, I think will show up from their point of view. And you'll wonder and you'll be wistful about the days when that point of view didn't intrude on the exclusivity of the one you've grown to enjoy throughout time. I just think it's a waste of time and focus. To make distinctions in gender when, if you direct your thinking to, from my point of view, what I'm recommending, to who are you as a Pilates instructor, and that you're helping human beings coordinate their being, thinking, and observing, See, it's all so complicated in terminology and politically correct saying things. My take on making distinction by gender is to look through the lens of capacities and recognize for any person, regardless of their gender, their capacity, their capability within a capacity, and be able to engage them in that area, in that capacity. So if they got a lot of thinking going on, see, what I don't get is what you don't get about this, in terms of, oh, maybe you do, you probably do, or you wouldn't be listening. So Pilates is about being human. It's about surviving as a human. Joseph Pilates was a survivor. His method is survival training. And then, yeah, that becomes my ending. That Pilates is personal and universal. And right now I think it's predominantly considered to be personal because it's considered to be something that is subjectively determined and improvised willfully with one's own creativity, because there's a lack of acknowledgement or awareness that there is a consistency to Joe's work. Joe left a message. Enjoy what you do and how you do it, and be aware that bemoaning why this group or gender doesn't partake in Pilates that's dominated by the other gender, maybe it's because the other gender see, you know, in this whole diving thing for doing an exercise, because in my mind I've switched between gender on clients that are heavy into thinking. They're really smart, way smarter than me, doing way more difficult stuff. The wizardry or the art, the high art of being a Pilates instructor is engaging a human's being, thinking, and observing into coordination. And in so doing, according to MMP, connecting you with the universe faster than light. Now I know that's way out there, and I know that really narrows the audience of appeal. But if you get that observing, according to quantum physics, has those characteristics, then all of the mysticism and all of the sacredness that I feel within and get from others, and that protective defense about what it is to them that matters so much, it's this, MMP as biology and physics, physics and observing, is this explanation to or attribution of what makes it all so special is that observing that goes on in the effort. And the communion that you have with yourself, that comes from that. And not just in a contemplative way, but through the movements themselves, right? Connected to the experiential feedback loop. Someday, knowing will be more popular, and maybe never, and maybe always the being side of a person's See, there's nothing you can do, there's nothing you can deliver to someone who's really smart better than an experience that puts their thinking into coordination with the rest of themselves, with their being and their observing. That's just, to me, a sacred, there you go, sacred experience that you dive for all the time. And in the pursuit of the classic choreography, because all of it, the mat, the Cadillac, the reformer, the chair, the barrels, the springs, has a consistency to it by what is represented in exercises using all that equipment. If you learn these 5 things, you'll have a handle on on CT and MMP. Moreover, the first 3 things are Joe's promised definition and sequence. See, feeling like or promoting the idea that there is contestation between genders misses the point of its universality. So my number 2 title was Pilates is personal and universal. Yes, it is personal. And within the point of view of MMP, it's also universal. Because you see progressive patterns of movement. Because you see loading. Because you see flow. Because you see a whole body effort being made in the flow. Be careful what you wish for, where if you're all in your being and in one end of a gender thinking the other end doesn't get it, well, when they get it the way they can get it and like to get it, it initially will be, I think, as biased as the other extreme from its own point of view, where thinking matters more than being. So whether you're all in your body driven or in your mind driven, the driven towards is the coordination of both. And observing is the capacity that is the third thing that is required to pursue the experience. Okay. So when you know what you know, and you recognize the capacities that you're trying to coordinate, gender isn't an issue unless you look at the imbalance that a gender may subjectively subject you to. In my opinion, as a Pilates instructor, to take some point of view where you're aware that every human being has capacities, and to do what you do and be the creative, beautiful source of light that you are, illuminate the pursuit of control that you're after. Joe's target, his message, contrology. By mirroring the ideal in which we find ourselves in. Better sooner than later, because life can't live forever. Read between the lines and see behind the curtain. Evaluate points of view. And know how at least the MMP point of view gives you a basis for why you do what you do. Because MMP is a theory attempting to explain Pilates and looking for an ideal within it. What don't you get? Add 2 and 2. I still like Patreon, even though it seems my website has met its closing. I encourage you to be a creator at Patreon, because we're on this add 2 and 2 thing. And a lot to me, that means to me, how do I survive as a Pilates instructor when it comes to adding 2 and 2? And how do you get income coming your way? Make your own course on udemy.com. I hear you waiting for me to go on into saying at udemy.com, buy the course I wrote called How to Survive as a Pilates Instructor, in order to download the PowerPoint presentation of these 5 things. Maybe I just have to offer outright payment for someone to make the presentation. Interesting idea. You know, would you even be interested in being a presenter? That's the whole thing, see. For whatever reason, you're limited to, I think, the scope you can accomplish during your own lifetime. So you put as much art out there as possible and hope it resonates whenever it can and does. So direct your thinking. Geist.